Good morning and welcome to round 3 coverage of Grand Prix Portland. I'm Brian David Marshall. It is my pleasure to be joined by two-time Pro Tour Top 8 competitor Reed Duke here in the booth. And we are watching Talitha Trippel versus Christopher Fennell. And talk about the deck that Talitha Trippel is playing. What it says under their names right now is not actually correct. Talitha is playing a really unusual deck here.
Yeah, so she's got a black-white vampire deck.
And you see she's led off with a Calastria healer here.
Yeah, so that's one of the big, heavy lifters in her deck, being both a vampire, and she's got a huge life gain, life loss sub-theme going on here. Even going as far as playing Cliffhaven Vampire, which was, a limited staple from the last format, but really, really looks to be a good card in her deck.
Now, Christopher Fennell is playing a black-green Delirium deck, which was a deck that was very popular at the Pro Tour. What does his deck look like to you? Where do you think he sort of veered from the Pro Tour?
Well, I really like Chris's deck. As
he plays a Sullivan Advocate.
Yeah, it has all the strengths of a normal black-green rock deck with plenty of removal and plenty of solid creatures. He's got also a little bit of a ramp theme with 1 Mrs. Pilgrimage, 2 Hedron Archives, going all the way up to 2 Emeralds.
All right, there you see the Sylvan Advocate that Chris played, and then he plays Grasp of Darkness to take out Drana, Liberator of Malakir.
Yeah, so that's a big play from Chris, taking out Drana before she can do damage that can't be undone. Drana's a card that can really spiral out of control quickly if it goes unanswered.
So tell you a little bit about, we know about Chris. Chris is a Pro Tour Top 8 competitor. He's a Grand Prix champion. Talitha, on the other hand, is not as well known. But she's someone who's been playing Magic. Her mother got her into the game, and so she blames her mother for this. Wasn't able to keep up with competitive Magic in college, a familiar story that a lot of us know well, but has gotten back into it pretty heavily. And the deck box that's next to her was made by her father, so Magic's sort of a family affair for them.
Very cool. And I really like the originality of her deck here. Very dissimilar from anything we saw at the Pro Tour or anything we saw in the previous standard season.
Yeah, she's got Zulaport Cutthroat. She's got Calastria Healers. You see, is that a Lantern Scout in play there?
Yeah, so the life gain in her deck plays multiple roles. I mean, the first and most obvious is just that it makes her deck great for racing against an opposing creature deck. We have seen the blue-red Fevered Visions, blue-red burn becoming a major player, just walking around the tables in the early rounds. So this deck has a lot of natural tools against that.
Yeah.
Also, the theme of using Cliffhaven Vampire and just generally bleeding the opponent to death is a nice strategy.
Yeah. So another Drana for Talitha after Guiltleaf Winnower takes out the Lantern Scout.
Yeah, Guiltleaf Winnower is just a one-of in Chris's deck, but it looks to be almost the best possible card against Talitha.
Yeah.
All of the vampires, generally having higher toughness than power.
You're not supposed to be able to murder a vampire very easily, but Chris did that with Murder and played another Sylvan Advocate as well. He's one land away from turning that on, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And he might find that here with a Vessel of Nascency.
Yep, very likely to find a land, and if not, perhaps another creature for next turn.
Well, there's definitely land there.
Yeah, so
plays it. Yep, and now he has a 4/3 Sylvan Advocate. 4/5.
Yeah, so that's an 8-point attack, which against most decks I would think of as a turn 2 clock here, but pretty sure Talitha is going to be able to find a way to gain at least a life or 2.
There's Serene Steward. And in for 8 comes Christopher Fennell.
And this is going to force a chump block, or even better, a double block on the Guiltleaf Winnower.
And that's what happens. She also gets to gain a little life there from the Zulaport Cutthroat. But, wow, we're not done. Christopher Fennell's got a Woodland Bellower.
Yeah, so he is really keeping the pressure on by just putting giant creatures on the board. Talitha stuck on 3 lands, so Chris doesn't have to worry about something like a Planar Outburst coming next turn.
Yeah, and he just gets another Sylvan Advocate there.
And the torturous tapped land is the 4th land.
There's Pacifism for the Bellower. Talitha's at 6, and she's staring down 8 damage from those advocates. Yeah, she does the quick math there, and they are going to be on to game 2 here. So it says, you consider this an allies deck or a vampires deck?
Well, it looks like both. I mean, a lot of the creatures happen to have both of those creature types, and Colastria Healer does a lot of work, in triggering off of all the allies. Serene Steward is also an ally and also great to go along with all of the life gain, all the vampires that can trigger her. And there's even a March from the Tomb in Talitha's deck.
So now we're looking in on Joe Lossett versus Alec Sonquist. Joe Lossett is really known as a legacy specialist, right? Like the Miracles guy. But it's done very well in Standard and Modern.
Yeah, and looks like Joe has found a way to port his Legacy Miracles deck into this new Standard format with Esper control.
Yeah, you see Narset Transcendent, Oath of Jace, and Jace himself, the Burns Prodigy.
Oath of Jace, I think, may be a sleeper card in this format. It's a nice card draw spell in a format that doesn't have a lot of great options for card draw spells. It helps you fill your graveyard for Delirium, and Joe looks like he's playing a pretty healthy number of Planeswalkers, so he's going to get to use the Scry upkeep ability very often. Those things really add up.
Across the board, he's facing Ishkanah, Graph Widow, with also childless in this case. No baby spiders, no Delirium nowhere in sight, and a Hangerback Walker with 3 counters on it.
Yeah, so it looks like Alex Sonquist is playing a red-green, probably a ramp strategy. And just because his creatures don't look particularly impressive right now, it doesn't mean that it's time to count him out yet, because he's pretty likely just biding his time till he can cast his 7+ mana spells, which tend to be very strong against slower control decks.
Plays his 6th land, a mountain. Makes like he's going to tap it all. Up, taps 4.
Oh, very nice. I was hoping we'd see this card out of Alec. Collective Defiance, which is very good against Planeswalkers.
Huge card this weekend. I know everyone was scrambling for them.
Yeah, so a ramp deck doesn't necessarily always benefit from the 3 damage to the opponent, but if you can take off Planeswalker while also either cycling your hand or taking a creature off the table, that's a pretty good effect.
So Infinite Obliteration from Joe Lossett. Don't know what he named. Going to assume Emrakul.
Wow, I love this from Joe. Main deck Infinite Obliteration. This is a guy who knew what to expect for this tournament.
And all right, let's look through the deck. So we'll see if he indeed named Emrakul. He did. We'll also find out how many of these he's going to be dealing with for the rest of this match. Okay, so a little bit of card disadvantage just in terms of the straight-up interaction of the card with Alex Sonquist's hand, but it kind of cuts off a path to victory for Sonquist.
Yes.
Do you still like Infinite Obliteration when you're not able to hit in the hand?
Well, I think in a spot like this, Joe's happy to have it because he has done a pretty good job of neutralizing Alex's early threats and is in a position where he could maybe take control with his Planeswalkers and his card advantage. Now, not having to worry about Emrakul means he can play the game that he wants to play.
See, Pulse of Marasa in Alex Sonquist's hand. The original grapple with the past.
Yeah.
Also a Chandra, and I couldn't quite see what land that was.
That was Shrine of the Forsaken Gods.
Okay.
Which will be active, but having lost his Emrakul's, perhaps a little bit less relevant than it might have been.
Now your red-green ramp deck played a lot of different threats. You could survive an Infinite Obliteration when you top-8 the Pro Tour last weekend. What's going on in terms of some of the other threats in Sonquist's deck?
Well, Sonquist is playing 3 Emrakuls, and he's leaning a little bit more heavily on them, especially in game 1. And that's the thing about my deck, was I was well prepared to beat Infinite Obliteration after sideboard, but in game 1, not so much. Looks like Alec still has a World Breaker. He's got 2 Chandras, one of which is in his hand. And this is a pretty interesting dynamic that we're seeing on the board here, with Joe representing a counterspell and Alec being hesitant to run one of his most important threats into that open mana.
And then what kind of counterspells are we likely to see out of Joe Lossett's deck here? Are there any?
This is a standard format where counterspells are remarkably unpopular. Sometimes you see a small number of negates or Clash of Wills. It looks like Joe has one of each of the blue commands, one Ojutai's command, one Silumgar's command. And as far as I can see, that's it in the main deck. So
no main deck summary dismissal, as some of the murmurs out on the floor were yesterday?
No, it looks like Joe's answer to Emrakul is the Infinite Obliteration, which he can find with Dark Petition. So that's a nice, clean way to solve that problem using only one main deck slot.
Meanwhile, Alex Sonquist has cast Pulse of Marasa, gotten back his Ishkana.
Yeah, a cool card there in Pulse of Marasa, because it's going to be great against the burn-heavy decks, which we've seen running around, and even against Esper Control, where you're not so excited about the 6 life gain, you can at least rebuy one of your most important threats and just, cash it in for another must answer.
Right. Joe decides to cast Grasp of Darkness on the Hangerback Walker. 3 tokens for Alex Sonquist. He plays a Spider, and he's going to get 3 more tokens.
Yeah, so all of a sudden we go from 1 creature to 7.
Yeah, instant army.
Joe is going to be hard-pressed to find a board sweeper here, like a Languish or Planar Outburst.
All right, but it looks like he does have a Languish.
Yep, he does play the full 4 here.
And kind of telegraphs that a little bit once you kill the... once you kill the Hangerback Walker, you probably have something like that going on. Okay, so you know what, we're gonna this match I think will still be here when we get done with our other match.
These guys are settling for a long game.
Yeah, we're gonna go back to our main table between Talitha Trippel with her allies deck versus Christopher Fennell playing green-black Delirium, and Eiley gets into the red zone here.
Yeah, we saw Chris take the first game by just having huge creatures against an opponent stumbling on mana. That has been an effective strategy in Magic for a long time. But Talitha has a great start here with Eiley into Drana, and if Chris doesn't have the answer to Drana, things could spiral out of control. Wow, looks like he has the answer to Drana, but it comes at the expense of being able to find his land drop.
Oh, yeah. So there's a Kalastri Healer. In comes Eiley. And no 4th land for Talitha. So there you see the Kalastri Healer. Whenever it or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Uh-oh.
So Chris found the 3rd land right on time, and Liliana not going to be able to kill anything on this board, but certainly going to slow the bleeding by both reducing Eiley's power and perhaps encouraging Talitha to send some attacks at Liliana instead of at Chris.
So there is Zulaport Cutthroat.
So assembling a pretty nice trifecta of life loss here. Eiley can sacrifice creatures at a moment's notice to trigger the Zulaport Cutthroat, and I could pretty easily envision this game going in a way where Talitha actually gets to the 30 life to activate Eiley's second ability.
So activates
Liliana to kill the Zulaport Cutthroat. Talitha just lets it go.
Yeah. Decides she's going to double check.
Yeah. And this is not so bad for Talitha, because if she has a removal spell for Sylvan Advocate, that means she can knock Liliana within lethal range for an attack next turn.
All right, looks like she did find a 4th land this turn. There it is. There's Pacifism.
Yeah, Pacifism. So that's a Dragons of Tarkir Pacifism card that I haven't seen in Standard in a while, but does the job pretty nicely here.
And drops Liliana down to 1 loyalty. And Traverse the Ulvenwald is going to go get a land for Chris. He plays his fourth land.
Yeah, and straight to play there.
And then what's he going to do with his 3 mana here? See a Hedron Archive looming for next turn, but he has to pass the turn back to Talitha.
Yeah, so Chris much slower out of the gates here. That's the cost of playing cards like Traverse the Ulvenwald and Vessel of Nascency, which, yeah, they can find you lands, but if you are stumbling and you have to spend your time casting those, it can slow you down a bit. It looks like Chris is just a handful of 4 mana spells, pretty much.
So Shambling Vent gets activated, and Colastria Healer both attack in, kill the Liliana.
Yep, well, steadily moving Talitha's life total upwards.
Right, she gains a life there. There's Explosive Vegetation. A ramp spell we didn't see a lot of at the Pro Tour.
Yeah, you know, the funny thing about Explosive Vegetation is it's still great at ramping your mana, but a card like Hedron Archive has a lot more value when it's in the graveyard,
right,
being an artifact for Delirium or for making Emrakul cost 1 less mana.
All right, here comes another Zulaport Cutthroat. That drops Christopher down to 13 with the trigger from the healer.
Yeah, so Chris had to fully take the turn off there and lose a little bit of life in the process, but I think he's going to have a big turn this turn because it's really the first time he's able to untap with healthy amount of mana.
Yeah, he's down to 10, and there's the Woodland Bellower. He's going to put a creature directly into play here.
Okay, and he goes for Sylvan Advocate, just most power and toughness he can get.
Yeah, it's fully powered here. So that's 10 points of power for 6 mana.
Yeah.
Not quite 13 points of power for 6 mana.
Well, actually pretty close if you count the Sylvan Advocate pumping up that hissing quagmire.
Oh, there we go. So we're actually a little bit better than an Emrakul here.
Yeah, minus the Mind Slaver your opponent trigger, but I don't think Chris is complaining on this board.
So how much is Chris worrying about the ability from Eiley? How close are we to seeing that? What would happen there?
Well, I think it's certainly something he should be thinking about between the Colastria Healer, the Zulaport Cutthroat, and the Shambling Vents. The good news for Chris is that Talitha doesn't have a ton of mana to play with, so at most you'd be looking at 1 turn to get to 30 life, and then a 2nd turn to activate the ability of Eiley once. And Chris now has pretty healthy number of creatures on the battlefield, so he's not going to get the rug swept out from under him just by 1 activation.
And he plays Nissa, goes and gets a land,
and now Chris's deck is just humming along.
Yeah.
This is exactly where he wants to
and
be.
transforms it into the Planeswalker. This is Sage Animus. And green is just not supposed to get this kind of card drawing ability. It's just kind of brutal. Oh my gosh. And then into Kalitas, and in comes the Sylvan Advocate.
Yeah, so I like that sequencing from Chris. Eiley having Death Touch normally would do a pretty nice job of holding off the Sylvan Advocate, but playing Kalitas pre-combat certainly discourages that type of block.
All right. Talitha attacks with everyone. She just sends them right in.
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure what to make of this. It could be just like a desperation attack, I see things spiraling out of control and want to do something. Or it could be that she has one of her, big cards, like maybe a March from the Tomb for post-combat, and she doesn't mind trading off creatures
Possibly a planar outburst that came in from her sideboard.
Yeah, that could be a great call. And if that's the case, then she doesn't mind giving Chris a few zombies to start here, because they're all going to get wiped up by a planar outburst.
In fact, it's better for her creatures to die immediately.
Yep, exactly.
They're worse than dead. They're exiled. I don't think she was expecting them to get exiled there.
Yeah, she has March from the Tomb in her hand, so maybe she was just looking to bring everything back. But
right.
Unfortunately, the Kalitas is a real, wrench in the works.
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. one of the few easy ways to interact with someone's graveyard. People have been searching for more convoluted ways to deal with it, but Talitha does a pretty good job. As long as the creatures are gone from play, she brings back Drana, she brings back the Cutthroat. Grasp of Darkness takes out one, makes a zombie. Oh, here comes up Nixless, takes out another. That's going to be another zombie.
Yeah, so now the board is really flooded. Talitha's going to have to find probably a planar outburst next turn and then start worrying about dealing with these two planeswalkers.
Chris activates Nissa, puts a land into play off of its ability. So it's lining things up in rows, lands, planeswalkers, creatures. You know you're winning. That's a great, depending on how many tiers of permanence you have, that's how you can tell whether or not you're winning.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here comes the team. Talitha drops to 8. Is this a planar outburst?
It's not a planar outburst.
It looks like a retreat to Hagra.
She has Sorin Grim Nemesis, which can take out one threat, gain a bunch of life along the way,
You gotta get
but
rid
it's
of
still
that
going to be a
Kalitas.
long road.
Yeah, she's dead on board, even taking out Kalitas here.
Yeah, so she can go up to 16 life.
Oh, sure.
And Chris, if Kalitas dies, is going to have 14 power worth of creatures. If he activates the Hissing Quagmire, it can still be lethal.
She goes up to 12. Yep, there's your Hissing Quagmire.
Yep, and it's even pumped up by the Sylvan Advocate that we forgot about sitting under a pacifism there. So that's a 6/6 creature.
And that's the game. Christopher Fennell goes to, wins the match 2-0, goes to 3-0. And I'm wondering whether or not Joe Lossett and Alec are even in game 2 yet. But we're going to be able to look in on them.
Yeah, they certainly weren't showing signs of ending when we last saw them. And okay, it looks like they're just starting game 2. And Alec actually took that game down.
Yeah, last we saw, Joe Lossett was wiping the board of everything except in Ishkanah. He had infinite obliteration Alec's Emeralds. I'm curious what Alec did to win that game.
Yeah, so his plan A was off the table, having lost his 3 Emeralds, but it could be just that the Chandra that was in his hand when we left went the distance.
That seems
Not
like
too sure.
That seems like a good plan. Play a Planeswalker, win. All right, Joe is under some pressure here from a Sylvan Advocate. He's got Jace Vryn's Prodigy in play, 4 lands. And there's Kalitas.
Yeah, a card we saw do tons of work in last game.
Yeah.
Just one of the hallmark cards of Standard, I'd say.
We actually saw it interact in every possible way. We saw it gain life, we saw it make zombies, and we saw it exile creatures as they went to the graveyard, and it was all relevant in that match.
Yeah. Brick walling a Sylvan Advocate here. It looked like Joe used to transgress the mind earlier to punch a hole in Alec's hand, so...
That would be the Tireless Tracker we see down below. It looks like a Silumgar's Command in hand for Joe Lossett, or is that actually a...
So he has a Silumgar's Command that perhaps he looted away with the Jace.
Oh, there it
is.
is. Okay,
It's a Dragonlord Ojutai.
Dragonlord Ojutai.
Looks to be coming down here.
Yeah, card I have not seen at all. I didn't see this card once at the Pro Tour. Did you see anyone play that card against you?
No, I really didn't. Which is...
It just took a whole Pro Tour off. It deferred to Hawaii.
Yeah. The first time for a while that we've seen Esper Dragons not be a popular deck, or at least, a tier 2 deck in Standard.
And nothing going for Alex, and they go on to game 3 pretty quickly there.
Yeah, so Joe really had the Esper 1, 2, 3 of Jace, Kalitas, Dragonlord Ojutai.
There you get a look at the feature match area. Going to see Adrian Sullivan and his opponent wrapping up. You'll get to watch that match in a few minutes after we're done.
Yeah, so far the story of this round seems to be the more powerful mythic rares just doing what they're supposed to do. Talitha, her synergy-based deck just couldn't compete with the raw power of Chris's deck. But I still like a lot of things she's up to. I hope she gets a lot of burn matchups for the rest of the tournament.
Yeah, it's like, Fevered
Frustrates
Visions,
people trying to
yes.
deal 1 damage at a time with Thermo Alchemist.
Thank you for giving me all these cheap creatures I can play and gain life with. So game 3, let's take a look at these guys' sideboards. You talked about that idea of, bringing in some more threats if you're Alec Sonquist after you saw the main deck, Infinite Obliteration.
Yeah, and we know already that he brought in Tireless Tracker off the sideboard. He also has access. Oh, and Sylvan Advocate he brought in as well.
Yeah. How do you like Goblin Dark Dwellers in this matchup?
I think it's great. I think it's a really powerful card. It's a nice mix of being a huge play if you can actually resolve it, but being affordable. So if the opponent's attacking your Nissa's Pilgrimages and other ramp spells, you can still get to it in a pretty reasonable time frame.
And just for Joe Lossett, we also saw one of his sideboard cards in game 2. Kalitas is actually a sideboard card.
Yep, 3 of those off the sideboard with the logic that red-green can't afford to have a lot of creature removal after sideboard, has to keep its threat density high, and if you can just pair Kalitas with tons of removal, it's a pretty good recipe for beating them.
Do you expect that Virulent Plague came in, after you see the Graph Widow and you see the Hangerback Walker in game 1?
That's an interesting question. It certainly wouldn't be a bad one-of to bring in alongside Dark Petition.
Right.
You have access to it. However, I don't think Ishkana in particular is one of Alec's best threats against Joe. We saw him clean it up pretty easily with a Languish in the first game. So I'm not sure. It depends how much Joe feels he can cut from his main deck and just, how annoying those Hangerback Walkers are for him.
All right. We're underway here in game 3. We see a Cinderglade and a Traverse the Uvenwald for a mountain.
This is a very classic matchup. Even though, we have a ton of new Eldritch Moon cards in both of these decks, and the ramp decks and the control decks have both changed a lot over the years. You often see ramp facing up against control as just a classic matchup that these players always have to prepare for.
So what do I look for if I'm against Alec Sonquist? Where do I feel like Alec has the upper hand?
Well, it puts the control deck in a bizarre position because normally the control deck is looking to play for the late game, but the red-green ramp deck just has a way higher density of powerful Haymaker cards, and a lot of them actually have uncounterable triggers like World Breaker, like Emrakul. So Joe, as the control player, has 2 options. He can either try to dismantle those late-game threats.
Like he's doing right now with Transgress the Mind.
Yep, and like he did in Game 1 with Infinite Obliteration on Emrakul. Or his second option, which we sort of saw in Game 2, is to just try to close the game quickly with creatures of his own, like using Transgress the Mind and some well-placed counterspells as Disruption, and putting pressure on with Kalitas or Dragonlord Urgetai.
And once again, the play here is Transgress the Mind for Tireless Tracker, which is such a key card for Alec.
Yeah, absolutely. It's key, both in the sense that it provides card advantage and that it's one of his cheapest relevant plays. And I think we're just going to see him have to pass the turn now after having lost the Tireless Tracker.
Yeah, and Evolving Wilds cracks it immediately as he passes the turn back, gets a mountain. We're getting a little late in the round, and he wants to just, doesn't have to wait until his opponent's end step to do it.
Yeah, might as well.
Get that shuffling out of the way now.
So if I see Joe's hand correctly, he is missing blue mana, but still has a lot that he can use to progress his game plan here.
Okay. Plays a swamp. And there's Liliana. And we saw that card single-handedly win matches at the Pro Tour, just able to immediately go into, emblem mode. But here he actually chooses to tick it down, but doesn't find anything to return with the ability.
Yeah, so I wonder if that's an effort to actually look for a creature or if he wants to fill his graveyard for Delirium. And I do see that Joe has an Emrakul of his own somewhere in his library.
Ooh. Espricle Control.
Spell Mastery, also important in Joe's deck.
Yeah. So there we see the Collective Defiance.
Wow, big turn
Oh, wow.
from Alec.
So this is where we really see what that card is capable of doing. He discards his hand, draws that many cards, and gets to kill the Liliana with the damage to Joe Lossett. So but another transgress for Joe.
That's a play I've seen quite a bit from these red-green ramp decks, is just using the Collective Defiance to sort of cycle their hand early, ensure that the graveyard is full for the rest of the game, and dig deeper towards, well, both mana and the powerful late-game threats.
Yeah, it looked like he took a Nissa's Pilgrimage there with the Transgress the Mind.
Yep, Nissa's Pilgrimage, I would say the single most important card in this deck. Not only is ramping very important, but it also puts as many as 2 extra cards in your hand that you can cycle with Collective Defiance or Tormenting Voice, or just ensure your land drops for the next handful of turns.
So two power Hangerback Walker comes down, Evolving Wilds comes down, and again, Alec immediately just fetches for his land, gets that out of the way.
So interestingly, the Collective Defiance wouldn't have been able to kill Liliana if Joe had chosen to just tick it up.
And I wonder if he had a plan for that, because he did know the Collective Defiance was in hand from that earlier Transgress.
Yeah, I think the way Joe played indicates that Liliana is not a super important card to him on this board state. He'd rather fill his graveyard and maybe get the Collective Defiance out of Alec's hand.
And he knew he had that other Transgress, so he's like, oh, give me a fresh set of cards to dismantle. So Languish takes out a Hangerback Walker. Pretty aggressive Languish there.
Yep.
With both players at 20.
I think that's a case of Joe just trying to use his mana as efficiently as possible. He's really hoping to draw a land on his turn, either so he can deploy Ob Nixilis or so he can start casting some of the blue cards that are stranded in his hand.
Here comes land number 6 from Alec. And finds another Nissa Pilgrimage. He does. It looks like he has Spell Mastery.
So here we're getting to a board state that you see a lot in the ramp versus control matchup, where the control player sort of tears apart the ramp player's hand, and then it's just a question of, can the ramp player draw a big threat off the top of the deck in the right window? Alec has enough mana and a full enough graveyard that he can cast virtually anything he draws, and Joe is a little bit stalled here, not finding his 5th mana for Ob Nixilis. So it's just a race of who can find what they need first.
And in the interest of racing, Joe Lossett activates a Shambling Vent and attacks for 2 damage and goes to 20 and drops Alec to 18.
Okay, so the sweat continues. Alec did not find a threat, but he found a Tormenting Voice to dig a little deeper in his library.
Discards one of those forests that he found last turn.
Interestingly, Alec also has a World Breaker in his graveyard that he could possibly recur, but he's going to need a colorless land before he can do that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wait, is this a Traverse?
All right, so Traverse with Delirium can find Alec anything he wants, and it looks like he chooses Ishkana Graph Widow. Now, this is a play I've mixed feelings about. I like, in concept, that Alec is trying to be aggressive and punish Joe's stumbling on mana. The fact that Joe used a Languish so frivolously earlier might be a hint that he has more, but I think the play is going to work out really well for Alec, because instead of having a Languish, Joe has a Planeswalker, which is honestly not very impressive in the face of so many creatures.
So, we saw this at the Pro Tour. Red-green decks with Ishkana that have no access to black mana to ever activate it, how disastrous is it to tinker with your mana base to be able to activate an Ishkana?
That's a great question, and I would say 80 or 90% of the time Ishkana is in these red-green decks to defend, to bridge the gap between the early turns and those huge expensive spells like Emrakul. However, in a matchup like this, it certainly wouldn't be out of the question for Alec to start activating Ishkana, especially if both players are sitting behind creatures, sitting behind planeswalkers, and the game drags out a little bit.
So Joe does find a blue mana spell in his source. He finds a Sunken Hollow and is able to deploy Jace Vryn's Prodigy. If he gets on tap with that, then he's going to be able to have access to that Languish in his graveyard.
Yeah, great point. So these are, I would say, the crucial turns of the game where Alec can either press his advantage if he finds a good card off the top of his library, or Joe can start to turn the game around by finding his land drops, neutralizing Alec's threat, and just getting his own deck humming.
And there's Worldbreaker, takes out a blue source.
Really, really big turn there. Now Joe still can make the play you suggested of flashing back the Languish, but now there's a 5/7 on the board, which he's going to have to answer as well.
Finds an island.
So Joe's in an interesting position. He would love to be able to use the Jace Fog a Creature trick by blocking and transforming in combat. And that would be really good if he could fog the Worldbreaker and wipe up the tokens. But unfortunately, if he wants to flash back the Languish, he's going to have to use the Jace now and can't have his cake and eat it too.
And that is what he does. Discards another Jace. Transforms into a Planeswalker. He also has an Obnixilis in hand.
Yeah, so he's going to have to take multiple turns to answer what Alec has on the board, and it'll be interesting to see which order he does it in. Flashing back the Languish now makes sense because then he doesn't risk losing his Jace to an attack and not having the option to do it later.
And there we go. Down go all the tokens. Spiders and Thopters alike. But like you said, there's still, 8 power on the board here.
Yep. So it seems pretty likely that Joe is going to lose his Jace to the Ishkana and take 5 damage from Worldbreaker. Or even better.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Dark Dwellers flashes back Collective Defiance for the last 3 damage.
Oh, wow. So Joe Lossett wins 1 game, but Alec Sonquist takes the match 2-1, and that is it for Reed and I here in round 3.
Test drive the top standard decks from Pro Tour Eldritch Moon in the Pro Tour Gauntlet, happening now on Magic Online. For more information, visit mtgo.com. Put your game to the test at a Grand Prix. These Magic celebrations are headlined by 2-day open tournaments with the best players in your region, as well as top Magic pros from around the world. Upcoming Grand Prix include Lille, Indianapolis, Guangzhou,